faint smile appeared on Fan Powsy's face as he released a palm-sized red jade box out of his sleeve with a golden talisman adhered to it, covering most of the box. The jade box was sent flying toward Han Li, who drew it into his own grasp before pointing a finger at it, upon which the talisman and lid of the box flew off on their own, revealing 7 scales of different colors, all of which were giving off astonishing spiritual pressure. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. "Go ahead and take a closer look, fellow Taoist Han," Fan Powsy said in a nonchalant manner. Han Li was a little suspicious, but he wasn't worried that the 2 true dragons would plot against him, so he drew a light blue scale out of the box and into his grasp. As soon as his fingers came into contact with the scale, his expression changed slightly as if he had sensed something, and he quickly pressed the scale against his own forehead before closing his eyes. Time slowly passed by, and a series of expressions appeared on Han Li's face one after another, including astonishment, awe, and even a hint of fear at the end. Only after a full 15 minutes had passed did Han Li remove the scale from his forehead and reopen his eyes. "I'm sure you've identified what these scales are by now, fellow Taoist Han. They're completely useless to the average person, but their value is immeasurable for someone aiming to ascend. After all, it's not every day that you get the opportunity to experience someone else's ascension tribulation," Elder Jin said in a calm manner. "That's certainly true, but there should be some differences in the ascension tribulations between true dragons and beings from other races," Han Li said. "There are slight differences, but it's largely similar. Also, no one would be willing to have others in close proximity during their ascension tribulation, so it's almost impossible to witness such a tribulation. This ability to record experiences into scales is an innate ability unique to our true dragon race, and it's not something that can be replicated by anyone else. These scales contain experiences of both successful and failed tribulations, and there are even some from true dragons who perished during their tribulations. I'm sure their importance to you would be no lesser than that of the true soul pill," Elder Jin said, with a confident stroke of his own beard. "That may be true, but I'm assuming these are disposable items that can't be replicated. Otherwise, you wouldn't be offering them to me so easily," Han Li said. "He, as expected of someone who's slain a true immortal. Indeed, each of these scales can only be used thrice, and after 3 uses they'll be destroyed. As for replication, I'm the only one in our entire race who knows the replication technique. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be offering these scales to you," Elder Jin replied. "If each scale can only be used thrice, then they're a lot less practical, and they won't be enough to exchange for a true soul pill," Han Li said in a calm manner. "In that case, how about I throw in a vial of myriad-year golden mulberry sap as well? This sap is a necessary ingredient to refine several types of legendary pills, and there aren't many vials of this liquid even on the entire True Dragon Island," Elder Jin proposed. "All right, in that case, I'm willing to go ahead with the exchange," Han Li quickly decided upon hearing this. A true soul pill could drastically enhance the power and stability of his soul, but practically speaking, it wasn't as useful to him as the tribulation experiences recorded within the dragon scales. Furthermore, they could be used multiple times, so they could benefit those close to him as well, making them far more useful than a true soul pill. Of course, he wouldn't have made this decision so easily if it weren't for the fact that he still had 2 true soul pills in his possession. Elder Jin was rather surprised by how quickly Han Li had agreed to the exchange, and he faltered slightly before an elated look appeared on his face. "You're a straightforward man, fellow Taoist Han. No wonder Fan Powsy decided to give you an invitation on just your first meeting. I'm sure you'll benefit immensely during this Tao Fruit Convention." He flipped a hand over as he spoke, summoning a small golden vial that he tossed directly toward Han Li. Han Li caught the vial before removing its lid and inspecting its contents with his spiritual sense, then nodded as he stowed it away. Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over to summon a palm-sized wooden box, which flew directly toward Elder Jin. Letter 1D4EF, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Elder Jin raised a hand to stop the wooden box in its tracks, and the lid was removed on its own to reveal a golden pill. He then took a whiff of the pill, and a pleased look appeared on his face. "Haha, this is definitely a true soul pill. With this, I'll be able to repay the favor I owe that good friend of mine." After that, Han Li conversed with Elder Jin for a short while longer before taking his leave, and he was accompanied by Fan Palsy. I knew from the first time I met you that you were no ordinary Grand Ascension stage being, but I didn't think you'd forge such a resounding reputation for yourself in such a short time, fellow Taoist Han. Not only did you kill that Stembor queen, you've even slain a true immortal now. It's a pity that I wasn't there for either of those battles, Fan Palsy said in a joking manner. I was only able to accomplish those feats through immense luck and with extensive external assistance. If I had been on my own, there was no way I would have been able to defeat those formidable foes. By the way, I must thank you for inviting me to this Dao Fruit Convention. It looks like I owe you quite a big favor, Han Li said with a faint smile. Haha, don't mention it. I knew that we would get along well, so I gave you an invitation. Otherwise, there was no way I would have done so, Fan Palsy replied in a nonchalant manner. In any case, attending this convention has benefited me immensely. Even if I don't manage to obtain the Dao fruit, it would have been well worth this trip, Han Li said with a serious expression. I'm sure you must be quite confident in your ability to obtain a Dao fruit, fellow Taoist Han. Many powerful beings from all realms were invited to attend this convention, but not many can compare with your power. Also, I heard that Tian Feier owes you a favor, and she's one of the convention's overseers, so. Fan Palsy's voice trailed off here as a meaningful look appeared in his eyes. You think far too highly of me, Brother Fan. Like you said, there are many powerful beings attending this convention. I certainly wouldn't dare to say that I'll be able to obtain a Dao fruit for sure. As for Fairy Tian, we've only met on 2 past occasions, Han Li replied in an ambiguous manner. Fan Palsy offered no response to this, but he was clearly unconvinced. He then quickly moved on to other topics of conversation that he was interested in, namely Han Li's battles against the Stembor Queen and Ma Liang. There wasn't too much to hide about those battles, so Han Li answered all of Fan Palsy's questions. Around an hour later, Fan Palsy returned to the Golden Ark alone, while Han Li was already nowhere to be seen. Half a month later, Han Li pressed a white jade slip against his own forehead as he sat in an extremely secluded cave, and one piece of information after another was flashing through his mind. True Lord Feng Yue reached the Grand Ascension stage 50,000 years ago, proficient in the 5 mountain profound arts. Tian Quezi reached the Grand Ascension stage 30,000 years ago, specializes in 36 types of poison arts, making him lethal in close proximity. Layman Ban Ryu reached the Grand Ascension stage 60,000 years ago, has attained full mastery of the Usra Vajra physique, and once slew 3 Grand Ascension stage devilish cultivators in a single day. 3 months later, the Dao Fruit Convention officially commenced. After a grand opening ceremony, a massive space that was enshrouded under a restriction unique to the true dragon race was opened up, and the battle for the Dao fruits began. Within a dense forest, Han Li was slowly flying along around 3 feet above the ground. All of a sudden, several of the nearby trees transformed into fearsome giants that were several thousand feet tall, and they raised their arms in unison, sending a vast expanse of green lightning crashing down from above. At the same time, countless green fist projections were unleashed, threatening to pulverize this entire space. However, Han Li was unsurprised to see this, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he stomped a foot down onto the ground below. Countless streaks of azure sword chi immediately erupted upward, slicing through the oncoming lightning and fist projections, following which a massive fiend celestial with 3 heads and 6 arms burst out of the forest, then released a halo of golden light with its 6 palms to instantly eradicate the rest of the fist projection. A faint cry of surprise rang out from a giant tree several kilometers away, and the fiend celestial immediately cast its gaze toward that direction before opening its mouth to expel a ball of dark green light, within which contained a small green vial that was several inches tall. Chapter 2445, Obtaining the Fruit. The vial then abruptly vanished into thin air, and in the next instant, fierce winds were swept up above the forest, while 5-colored spirit clouds converged from all directions. A gargantuan vial opening suddenly emerged from the clouds, then released a flurry of countless dark green runes. As soon as these runes surged out of the vial, they exploded into clouds of azure chi, and an enormous burst of law fluctuations instantly descended upon this entire space. A burst of loud rumbling rang out, and the air tremored slightly as countless trees and tons of soil were flung up into the air. In the blink of an eye, a vast region of the forest had been uprooted, and everything that rose up into the air was instantly reduced to powder upon reaching within 10,000 feet of the vial's opening, before being instantly drawn in. Everything in a radius of thousands of kilometers was instantly erased before being enshrouded under an azure light barrier, creating a giant black basin that was extremely smooth and completely devoid of life, and it was also rapidly growing deeper. All of a sudden, a ball of white light erupted out of the basin, then transformed into a massive elephant that was over 10,000 feet tall. The elephant was snowy white in color and had a pair of reddish-purple fiery wings on its back, which sent waves of purple flame surging toward Han Li with just a single flap. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly at the sight of the white flying elephant, and he immediately pointed a finger up at the vial opening in the sky while chanting an incantation. Azure light flashed again within the vial, and something shot out in a flash. All of a sudden, the white elephant let loose an anguished cry, and a dark green chain had appeared around its body in a wraith-like manner, binding it tightly in the blink of an eye. The giant elephant flapped its wings frantically as a layer of white light surged all over its body, sending enormous power erupting forth in all directions, but the green chain refused to be shaken off and was only growing tighter and thicker. A thunderous roar rang out as the giant elephant was shattered like a piece of fine china, revealing a middle-aged monk in a white cassia with a panicked look on his face. He cast his gaze toward the converging green chain, then gritted his teeth before pulling a thin crimson blade out of his sleeve, which he slashed viciously toward the oncoming chain. A burst of crimson light exploded as a strong rank odor wafted through the air, and a scintillating crimson flower bloomed in the sky to envelop the monk's entire body. However, the dark green chain remained completely unscathed and wound itself around the monk's body with ease. At the same time, bursts of green light appeared nearby before converging toward the center, and a series of green tornadoes rose up into the heavens, releasing a burst of incredible force that instantly tore the crimson flower into shreds. Immediately thereafter, the tornadoes transformed into countless azure paper-thin blades that surged toward the monk. All of the blades had dark green spirit patterns all over their surfaces and were giving off faint law fluctuations. The bound monk's face completely paled as he swept his spiritual sense toward these azure blades, and he hurriedly yelled, "Stop! I concede and am willing to offer you my Dao badge." As soon as his voice trailed off, he opened his mouth to release a silver badge. Han Li immediately ceased chanting his incantation, before casting an expressionless gaze toward the silver badge. "Only one. Where are the others? If you don't surrender them, I'll have to take them by force." The monk's pupils contracted slightly upon hearing this, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he sighed with a wry smile. "All right, I'll give you all of my Dao badges. Looks like I had no choice but to completely back out of this competition." Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth again to release 2 more silver badges. Right after those 2 badges were released, spatial fluctuations erupted beneath the monk, and a 5-colored light formation appeared, following which the monk abruptly vanished on the spot, leaving only the 3 silver badges and dark green chain behind. Han Li was completely unsurprised to see this, and the green chain and massive vial opening in the sky both disappeared at his behest. The surrounding green light barrier and 5-colored clouds in the sky also vanished, following which a small green vial slowly descended from the heavens. At the same time, the 3 silver badges also flew toward Han Li on their own. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to stow the vial and badges away, then departed from this area as a streak of azure light. Moments later, several streaks of light converged from different directions, then inspected the area with their spiritual sense from afar before carefully departing as well. Several days later, Han Li was in his giant golden ape form with 3 heads and 6 arms, and he pulverized a giant insect with a single punch, upon which a silver badge emerged. Han Li opened the mouth of his central head to swallow the badge, then reverted back to his human form before flying away. Half a month later, Han Li was facing off against a yellow-robed elderly man and a red-robed woman above a boundless sea in a triangular formation. In contrast with the grim expressions worn by the other 2, Han Li remained completely expressionless. Between them was a golden whale that was over 10,000 feet in length, and its body was riddled with wounds, while its aura was barely detectable, indicating that it was on the brink of death. Judging from the power of this illusionary beast, it must have more than 1 Dao badge in its body. "You 2 clearly don't intend to back out, so I'll take your Dao badges as well," Hanli said in a bone-chilling voice. Your powers are indeed incredible, but aren't you underestimating Mistress Huarong and myself? Let's see if you can back up your arrogance. The yellow-robed elderly man harumphed coldly. As soon as his voice trailed off, he made a grabbing motion with both hands, summoning a giant black sword and a green pagoda. The black sword immediately conjured up a massive black sandstorm, while the green pagoda swelled to the size of a mountain before layers of dazzling light swept toward Hanli out of its bottom. Meanwhile, the red-robed woman made a hand seal, and bursts of crimson flames erupted out of her body as she transformed into a massive crimson fiery phoenix. The phoenix raised its head and let loose a clear cry, then flapped its wings vigorously and swept toward Hanli as a sea of scorching flames. In response, Hanli raised a hand to summon his 3 extreme mountains, which formed a protective barrier before him, then flipped his other hand over to release the small green vial, which he tossed up into the air while chanting an incantation. Letter 1d4 BB, letter 1d4 5F, letter 2 1 2F, letter 2 1 2F, letter 1d4 6 4, letter 1d4 5 2, letter 1d4 4F, letter 1d4 B8, letter 1d4 5C, letter 1d6 2E. A month later, several elders of the true dragon race were standing on a platform in a mysterious space, casting their eyes toward a certain direction. All of a sudden, a streak of azure light shot forth from that direction before quickly arriving above the platform, then descended in front of the elders. Upon landing on the platform, Hanli cast his gaze toward Elder Jin with a faint smile on his face. Haha, as expected, you're the first person to have gathered enough badges and arrived at the Dao platform, fellow Taoist Han, Elder Jin chuckled. You're far too kind, Senior Jin. I was very fortunate to have been able to collect these Dao badges so quickly. Please examine the badges to make sure that there are enough, Hanli replied as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing over 100 silver badges, all of which hovered in midair before the group of elders. Elder Jin swept his spiritual sense over the badges before quickly giving a nod of approval. There are 108 badges here, enough for a vast spirit Dao fruit. Elder Feng, bring out a Dao fruit for fellow Taoist Han. A white-robed elder nodded in response before pulling a pristine white jade box out of his sleeve, then removed the lid to reveal a fist-sized reddish-purple fruit. The fruit was as translucent as a crystal, and was giving off an indescribable fragrant aroma. Even just a slight whiff of the fruit from afar struck Hanli with an instant boost in alertness, and he accepted the jade box before appraising the fruit inside with an intense gaze. As expected of the number 1 spirit fruit in all realms, this is truly an extraordinary creation of nature. I'm sure you already know the effects of this fruit, so I won't bore you with an explanation. Unfortunately, this fruit can only be consumed once in a lifetime. Otherwise, there's no way we'd be willing to hold this convention. By the way, prolonged exposure is detrimental to the vast spirit Dao fruit, so please stow it away as soon as possible, Elder Jin cautioned in a friendly manner. Thank you for the advice, Senior Jin, but that won't be necessary, Hanli said with a smile before pulling the fruit out of the box, then consumed it in a few quick mouthfuls. All of the elders looked on with stunned expressions, while Hanli smacked his lips a few times, seemingly eager for more. Chapter 2446, Change in the Human Race. Only after a long while did Elder Jin return to his senses, and a wry smile appeared on his face as he said, I didn't think you deconsume the Dao fruit right away, fellow Taoist Han. The safest way to deal with such an extraordinary fruit would naturally be to consume it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would only attract trouble, Hanli said with a smile. That's obviously up to you in the end. By the way, the effect of the vast spirit Dao fruit can be extended if you consume a few other types of spirit items along with it, Elder Jin said. 10,000 years of the vast spirit Dao physique should be sufficient for my cultivation. If I can't make a substantial breakthrough during this time, then an extension won't be of much use to me. In any case, your true dragon race has done me a great service, and I'll be sure to repay you in the future. There are a few more people who are almost here, so I'll be taking my leave now. Hanli cupped his fist in a parting salute, then flew away as a streak of azure light, vanishing into the distant sky after just a few flashes. As expected of someone who's slain a true immortal, if he can ascend to the true immortal realm, he'll definitely cause quite a stir there as well, Elder Feng praised. He'll have to actually be able to ascend first, Elder Jin said with a peculiar look in his eyes. What do you mean by that? With his current power, surely there would be a very good chance of success for him to transcend his ascension cultivation now that he's consumed the vast spirit Dao fruit, a green-robed female elder said. The other elders were also rather befuddled to hear this. Instead of giving a direct reply, Elder Jin stroked his own bear and asked, "What did you all think of his spiritual sense?" "It's very powerful, perhaps one of the most powerful among all beings participating in this Dao Fruit Convention," Elder Feng replied. "That's an understatement. If I'm not mistaken, he's only displayed a small portion of the full extent of his spiritual sense," Elder Jin said. "How is that possible? Wouldn't that mean that even our spiritual sense wouldn't be able to compare with his? Could it be that you verified this using that secret technique already?" Someone immediately exclaimed. "Of course, I wouldn't make such claims without any basis. The more powerful one's spiritual sense is, the more beneficial it would be for their chances at successful ascension. But his spiritual sense is too powerful, to the extent that it's exceeded the upper limit of what living beings in the lower realms can handle. My innate secret technique tells me that despite his powerful spiritual sense, its foundation is extremely shaky, and if he can't find a way to rectify this, he most likely won't even be able to survive past a few more centuries," Elder Jin explained. "How could this be? I wonder if he's aware of this himself. Even if he isn't, he'll sense this soon enough, but by then, it would most likely already be too late." "That's true. Matters regarding spiritual sense are always the most troublesome to deal with, so we can't really help him. Otherwise, Elder Jin would have revealed this to him earlier." Just as the elders were discussing this revelation, a streak of white light suddenly appeared in the distant sky before arriving near the platform, where it was revealed to be a handsome white-robed young man with a golden crown on his head. He cupped his fist in a salute and said, "Xuanyuan Jai of the Xuanyuan race pays his respects to the fellow Taoists of the true dragon race." "Oh, you're a member of the ancient Xuanyuan race." All of the elders were stunned to hear this, and they immediately focused their attention on the young man, quickly forgetting about the topic of conversation surrounding Han Li. A year later, Han Li returned to the Boundless Sea, and after a brief reunion with Nangong Wan and the others, he issued a string of orders to everyone in the Azure Origin Palace before going into seclusion in his secret chamber. This seemed to be an extremely important period of seclusion, and it stretched on for an unbroken period of 200 years. During this time, the human race underwent an astonishing transformation. Several years after Han Li went into seclusion, Fairy Ice Soul returned to the human race as a grand ascension stage being, creating a massive stir among all neighboring races. Immediately thereafter, the Wood Tribe and many other weaker races near the human race willingly pledged subordination to the human race one after another. After that, the nearby races who were on bad terms with the human race abandoned their territory and entered the primordial world, mass migrating to somewhere else on the continent. The human race naturally seized all of this vacant territory. Letter 1D4EF, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. At the same time, many foreign races across the Tian Yuan continent were expressing an urge to be on friendly terms with the human race, and there were even some races, like the Flying Spirit race, that declared that they were willing to forge alliances with the human race. Thus, in the short span of less than a century, the human race had been thrust firmly under the limelight. During this period, some cultivation arts and secret techniques of extremely high calibers began to spread within the human race, alongside many treasures that could be found almost nowhere else. As a result, many high-grade human cultivators who were stuck at bottlenecks made breakthroughs in an extremely short period of time, and intense competition had been sparked among the juniors with exceptional aptitude. The demon race didn't undergo anywhere near as drastic a transformation, but it also benefited significantly from the uprising of the human race. The demon race occupied the territory that was neglected by the human race, thereby expanding its territory by around twofold. Some of the new cultivation arts, secret techniques, pills, and treasures that had appeared in the human race also spread to the demon race, benefiting it immensely. If one were to carefully investigate all of this, they would discover that all of these things stemmed from the same place. Everything was originating in the area near the Azure Origin Palace, before somehow spreading into other areas, and accelerating the growth of the two races by a downright ridiculous extent. Another 200 years passed by, and on this day, A group of devilish guards were patrolling through the air at a low altitude on several black beast-drawn carriages over the original sealed site in the Elder Devil realm. Once the group of patrolling guards were far away, Han Li emerged out of thin air amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. He cast his gaze toward the guards in the distance, then turned his attention deeper into the original sealed site. I didn't think that the spirit refinement technique would be so troublesome that even Mo Guang and Hu Yuzi are unable to do anything about it. It's a pity I only managed to gather a small portion of that immortal's memories. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to make this trip, Han Li murmured to himself as he vanished into thin air again. A day later, he reappeared in a secluded area within the original sealed site. Not far up ahead was a crimson altar, upon which was placed a black bowl with 8 azure copper pillars around it. As Han Li approached the altar, a male voice rang out from the bowl. "So you came after all, fellow Taoist Han. At this point, I'm sure you no longer have any suspicions about the peril of the spirit refinement technique." Indeed, after spending 200 years in seclusion, Han Li had finally discovered the underlying issues in his spiritual sense, thereby forcing him to venture into the Elder Devil realm again. "Does our agreement still stand, Senior?" Han Li asked. "Of course I wouldn't go back on my word," the male voice replied without any hesitation. Han Li's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he said, "In that case, I agree to your condition. Please tell me the way to cultivate the 3rd stage of the spirit refinement technique." "Haha, you've made a wise decision, fellow Taoist Han. Only by mastering the 3rd stage will you buy yourself enough time to ascend to the true immortal realm," the male voice said in an elated manner. Immediately thereafter, a streak of white light flew out of the black bowl before reaching Han Li in a flash. This was a palm-sized jade talisman with countless golden and silver runes etched on its surface, as well as specks of 5-colored light flashing around it. "This is the talisman that can directly contact the true immortal realm, the way to activate it." Half a day later, a streak of azure light flew out of the lake at the center of the original sealed site, then departed toward a certain direction. Within the azure light, Han Li had his hands clasped behind his back with a contemplative look on his face. 300 years later, Bai Guor was situated in a certain hall in the Azure Origin Palace, delivering a report in a respectful manner to the seated Han Li. At the conclusion of her report, she extended a slight bow before summoning a white storage bracelet that she offered to Han Li with both hands. "Well done, Guor. Not only have you progressed significantly in your cultivation during your journey, you've also tracked down a large quantity of vast yin stones, many more than I had expected," Han Li said with a pleased smile after inspecting the contents of the storage bracelet with his spiritual sense. Chapter 2447, Returning to the Human World. I discovered an extremely secluded, profound jade mine while traveling through the western region of the Thunder Continent, and at the core of that mine was where I found all of this vast yin stone, Bai Guor replied in a respectful manner. "I see. In any case, if you hadn't cultivated your ice essence body to this level, you most likely wouldn't have been able to sense these vast yin stones. You can go for now. I'll be sure to reward you handsomely for this later," Han Li said with a warm expression. "Yes, master." Bai Guor extended another obedient salute before departing from the hall. Following her departure, a contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. He finally had the materials required to refine the vast yin glacial soul mountain, and once he did that, he would only have to track down the materials for one more extreme mountain to complete the set. He wasn't concerned about this, as he had witnessed Great North Essence light in the Devil Fall Valley of the human world, so he would most likely be able to easily find Great North Essence crystals there. However, at his current cultivation base, there was no way that he would be able to descend into the human world in person. Otherwise, the power of the realm would pose a huge headache to him. As such, he would have to use the star-defying plate and expend a very heavy price to send a fragment of his soul back to the human world. The soul fragment that he had been nurturing in the Origin Soul Lamp, this entire time, was finally going to come in useful. At the thought of returning to the human world, places such as the Seven Mysteries Sect, Yellow Maple Valley, and Cloudfall Sect immediately sprang into his mind. At the same time, he couldn't help but reminisce about his parents, little sister, Li Feiyu, monarch of soul divergence, and other people from that distant period in his life. Several months later, an earth-shattering boom rang out within a secret chamber in the Azure Origin Palace. At the center of the secret chamber was a giant crimson cauldron, within which was a small snowy white mountain with countless silver flames burning around it. As soon as the mountain emerged from the cauldron, it immediately swelled drastically in size, and a series of white runes appeared on its surface as it released a burst of white glacial chi. The vast Yin Glacial Soul Mountains is finally complete. All that's left now is the Great North Essence Mountain, Han Li murmured to himself as he sat in a corner of the secret chamber. A year later, there were several menacing-looking men huddled around a fire, roasting a small beast while conversing loudly with one another. They were situated on a secluded path on the border of the Great Jin, and even though their clothes were very much worse for wear, all of them had blood-stained weapons placed beside them. In a corner beside the fire was a frail man who was lying on the ground. This was a blue-robed man who appeared to be only around 21 to 22 years of age, and his face was very pale. His eyes were tightly shut, and his body was bound by a thick rope. There was also a wooden rod that had been sharpened on both ends bound around his mouth, and blood was flowing incessantly from the corners of his lips. It seemed that he was on the brink of death. However, the group of men paid no heed to him, and continued to converse with one another in a boisterous manner. After some time, one of the men suddenly said, "That bastard should be dead by now, right? Someone go take a look. To think that a frail scholar would dare to try and interfere with our business. He must have a death wish. I'll go take a look. He hasn't moved for quite a while now, so he should be just about dead. If not, I'll send him on his way," another man said with a cold expression as he picked up his weapon. "Suit yourself, but make it quick. We have to leave this area tomorrow. The entire world is in turmoil at the moment. It's not going to be easy to make a living," the first man said in a nonchalant manner. A cold smile appeared on the second man's face, and he made his way over to the blue-robed man with weapon in hand before giving him a vicious kick. The blue-robed man was sent flying for several feet before landing on his back, but he remained completely still, and the blood on the corners of his lips was beginning to congeal. "He's dead, Tui, lucky bastard. You've saved yourself some torture, that's for sure." The second man spat onto the ground before turning to return to the fire. Right at this moment, a gust of gray wind swept forth, and a burst of sinister cackling rang out. "Fantastic! I didn't think I would encounter such exceptional prey in such a secluded area. Once I suck away your souls, that treasure of mine will finally be successfully refined. It's that demonic cultivator who's been wreaking havoc in the area. Run!" one of the men exclaimed as his expression changed drastically, and he didn't even dare to make a grab for his weapon before fleeing the scene. Everyone else also scattered and ran for their lives in a horrified manner as well. Thus, the blue-robed man was the only one left beside the fire. The cackling continued, and all of a sudden, several bursts of black chi shot forth in different directions. Moments later, a string of blood-curdling cries rang out in succession from those directions. The cackling then abruptly ceased, and all of the black chi converged above the fire before transforming into a black-robed Taoist priest. The Taoist priest had a pair of small eyes that gave off a sinister appearance, and he was holding a gray crystal ball with an elated expression. The souls of those people contain a vast amount of baleful chi. They must have killed many people during their lifetimes. These souls are exceptional for refining this treasure. Oh, there's someone else there whose soul hasn't scattered yet. I'll go ahead and take it as well. A hint of surprise appeared on the Taoist priest's face as he spotted the blue-robed man on the ground, and he released a burst of black chi from the crystal ball that swept directly toward the blue-robed man. Boom! In the instant that the black chi came into contact with the blue-robed man, it abruptly exploded, sweeping up powerful shockwaves that forced the Taoist priest to rush back in retreat. "Who's there? Come out right now!" the Taoist priest exclaimed in an alarmed manner, then immediately released several talismans to form several light barriers around himself while inspecting his surroundings with a wary expression. "Judging from your aura, it looks like you're using a devil Tao cultivation art of the lowest caliber." A male voice suddenly rang out nearby. "Who's there?" The Taoist priest hurriedly cast his gaze toward the direction that the voice had come from, only to be completely stunned by what he saw. The blue-robed man had sat up with an indifferent expression, and the rope around his body and wooden stick in his mouth had both disappeared. "Who are you? Did you come here for me?" the Taoist priest asked in a wary manner as countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. "Did I come here for you? You think far too highly of yourself. No one in this entire human world is important enough to deserve a visit from me," the blue-robed man said as a hint of mockery appeared on his face. Human world, could it be that you're? I don't have time to waste speaking with a junior like you. The blue-robed man abruptly cut off the Taoist priest with a cold look in his eyes, then opened his mouth to release an azure thread. The light barriers around the Taoist priest's body were instantly destroyed, and a hole that was around as thick as a finger was blown through his glabella, upon which he collapsed to the ground before he could even make a single sound. The blue-robed man waved a hand to draw the body of the Taoist priest over to him, before he laid a hand on the Taoist priest's head. Blue light flashed within his eyes as a translucent thread shot out of his glabella, before vanishing into the Taoist priest's head in a flash. Moments later, he released the Taoist priest, and his body collapsed to the ground again. So the entire Great Jin is currently in the midst of a major war. How interesting. It doesn't have anything to do with me this time, but it seems that the human world is in complete turmoil again. It's a pity that this man's only at the Foundation establishment stage and doesn't know a lot. I wonder how things are at the Heavenly South region, the blue-robed man murmured to himself as he rose to his feet in an unhurried manner. He had been possessed by Han Li's soul fragment, which had descended into the human world. The soul fragment was only imbued with peak nascent soul stage magic power, but that already granted him near invincibility in the human world. Han Li examined his own dirty robes, then raised a hand to touch his own face, and his brows furrowed slightly. All of a sudden, he made a hand seal, and a layer of azure light surged over his body, upon which he transformed into an ordinary-looking azure-robed young man. After that, he rose up into the air and flew away as a streak of azure light. Outside a certain giant city in the Great Jin, millions of soldiers were scaling up tall ladders with all their might, attempting to reach the top of the city wall. In response, the opposing soldiers on the city wall were retaliating with arrows and spears to keep the enemies at bay, and the entire battle was a massive bloodbath. Chapter 2448, State of the Human World. There were also several hundred cultivators battling at an altitude of tens of thousands of feet, and on one side was a vast expanse of baleful chi, within which were countless ghostly shadows, while on the other side, several small formations had been set up, and all types of treasures were unleashing their powers. The most powerful beings among these cultivators was a pair of core formation cultivators, while the rest were mostly at the Foundation establishment stage. As expected, these sects have played an important role behind the turmoil of the Great Jin. Regardless of who gets the last laugh, it looks like the imperial family of the Great Jin is about to be dethroned. Han Li sighed as he looked on from a white cloud in the sky. All of his experiences in the Great Jin were still as clear in mind as if they had taken place yesterday. But in reality, most of his acquaintances, and even many of the sects that he was familiar with, had most likely ceased to exist by now. This battle was naturally not of much interest to Han Li, and after lingering nearby for a short while longer, he made a hand seal and vanished on the spot. Within the restricted area in the southern region of the Great Jin, groups of cultivators wearing attire from a range of different sects were routinely patrolling a giant black mountain that extended all the way up into the clouds. An extremely powerful flight restriction had been set up here, so aside from the most powerful nascent soul stage beings in this realm, no one would be able to reach the mountain through an aerial route. Many years ago, this mountain had been the center of extensive conflict, and even many high-grade cultivators had perished on it. In the end, it had been sealed and was being guarded by several major sects, all the way until today. At this point, most of the treasures on the mountain were already gone, so no high-grade beings were interested in it anymore. As such, even though the mountain appeared to be extremely tightly guarded, all of the guards were simply going through the motions and not taking their duty seriously. All of a sudden, a faint shadow vanished into the black mountain in a flash, completely bypassing the restrictions and guards. Around an hour later, Han Li appeared over 1,000 feet above the summit of the mountain, and with his enormous spiritual sense, he was able to instantly inspect every single inch of the mountain despite the many restrictions in place. A complex look appeared on Han Li's face as he appraised this mountain that was both extremely familiar, but also completely alien to him. Seeing as Kunwu Mountain is no longer the place it once was, there's no need for it to continue to exist. Allow me to erase you from this realm. Han Li sighed as he rose up higher into the air as a streak of azure light. Moments later, a gargantuan azure hand that was over 10,000 feet in length appeared above the mountain amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, and the palm came crashing down amid an earth-shattering boom. Countless layers of restrictions were instantly activated, but they didn't even manage to slow down the giant azure hand in the slightest as it raised the mountain to the ground, leaving only an extremely deep massive crater in its place. The patrolling guards were all astonished to see this, and they couldn't help but wonder if they were in a dream. Shortly thereafter, some nascent soul cultivators who had been notified of the situation quickly arrived on the scene. However, after an investigation, they were unable to detect anything aside from some residual spiritual power in the area, so they could only depart with even more questions than they had come with. After that, this event became one of the 10 most incredible legends of the Great Jinn, and it was discussed by countless cultivators over many years to come. However, as time passed, the tale began to die out, and after 10,000 years had passed, there were only some brief mentions of Kunwu Mountain that could be seen in some ancient tomes. Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D4, 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D68C, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. At this moment, Heavenly Star City of the Scattered Star Seas was extremely lively and bustling, and countless boats of different sizes were converging toward it from all directions. Countless foundation establishment and core formation cultivators had gathered in the city, and occasionally, a nascent soul cultivator or two could be seen flying toward the top of the Star Palace. This day was the 2000th birthday of Patriarch Ling, the master of the Star Palace, and all of the powers in the entire scattered star seas had begun preparing presents over 10 years ago. This was all in an effort to appease Patriarch Ling so that the Star Palace would continue to protect them. At noon, several tens of nascent soul cultivators had gathered in the Star Palace, and all of them were appraising the woman on the main seat with respectful expressions. The woman wore a white palatial dress and had skin as fair as jade. She was extremely beautiful, and as she cast her gaze around the hall, all of the nascent soul cultivators whom her gaze fell upon immediately lowered their heads as a gesture of respect. As the only early deity transformation cultivator in the entire scattered star seas, and the master of the Star Palace, this Patriarch Ling was deserving of such respect. Once spirit fruits and tea had been brought to all of the nascent soul cultivators by some female servants, Patriarch Ling said, "It's about time, let's begin the ceremony." Someone immediately gave an affirmative response, yet just as the commencement of the ceremony was about to be officially announced, a male voice suddenly rang out outside the hall. "Hee, looks like I came at just the right time. Surely you have some wine to spare for an old friend, Fairy Ling." As soon as the voice trailed off, Han Li appeared outside the hall before making his way into the room with a faint smile. All of the nascent soul cultivators present immediately swept their spiritual sense toward him, only to find that he was giving off no spiritual power fluctuations whatsoever, as if he were a mere mortal. A hint of bewilderment appeared on Patriarch Ling's face upon hearing this voice, and upon seeing the owner of the voice, she immediately rose to her feet in an astonished manner as she said in a trembling voice, "How could this? How could you still be in this realm?" "I have some matters to attend to in this realm, so I had no choice but to come. I must congratulate you on reaching the deity transformation stage following my departure, Fairy Ling," Han Li replied with a faint smile. "Everyone, please vacate the hall. I wish to speak with this old friend in private," Ling Yuling suddenly instructed in a cold voice. All of the nascent soul cultivators in the hall had no idea what was going on, nor this new arrival was, but they didn't dare to object and could only take their leave. Thus, Han Li and Ling Yuling were soon the only ones left in the hall. Following everyone's departure, Ling Yuling immediately activated a restriction in the hall, then asked in an elated manner, "Fellow Taoist Han, did you descend from the spirit realm?" "I did. However, that's a long story that I can tell you about in detail later. It's been many years since I left the human world, so there are some things that I need to ask you about," Han Li replied in an unhurried manner. "Rest assured, Brother Han, I've rarely ventured out of the scattered star seas during these past years, but I know everything that's been happening in the human world like the back of my hand," Ling Yuling said as a complex look appeared on her face. "That's good to hear. I haven't met any of my past acquaintances aside from you during this trip, and all I want to know about is how my past acquaintances and the powers I was once associated with have been doing," Han Li said. After that, Han Li stayed in the hall with Ling Yuling for half a day before the restriction around the hall disintegrated, and a streak of azure light shot out. "I hope to see you again in the spirit realm someday, fellow Taoist Ling." After that parting sentence, Han Li vanished into the distant sky. Inside the hall, Ling Yuling was still seated on a chair, holding a jade slip in her hand with an excited expression. Meanwhile, Heavenly Star City was already tens of thousands of kilometers away, pondering what Ling Yuling had just told him. It turned out that the island that he had Nangongwan had left behind in the scattered star seas had become the base for a major power, led by his disciple, Tian Kinner, and several other juniors of theirs. Technically speaking, the members of that power were granddisciples of his. There was no lack of core formation and nascent soul cultivators among their ranks, including one of the nascent soul cultivators attending Ling Yuling's birthday ceremony. Ling Yuling had taken good care of them in Han Li's absence, and they were developing smoothly, so Han Li decided not to go and meet them. Tian Kinner herself had failed to transcend her deity transformation stage tribulation many years ago and perished as a result. Thankfully, she had made some preparations beforehand, allowing her to preserve a part of her soul, so there was still a chance that she could be reincarnated. As for Shi Jian, the disciple of his who had inherited the teachings of the monarch of soul divergence, he had perished at the nascent soul during a battle against a powerful enemy. However, prior to his death, he had taken several disciples with great aptitude. As such, not only had the teachings of the monarch of soul divergence not gone into decline, it had experienced a resurgence of late. The Yellow Maple Valley and Drifting Cloud Sect had diverged in completely different directions during these past years. At the time, the Yellow Maple Valley had been facing a major crisis, but since then, it had taken several extremely prodigious disciples, most of whom had become nascent soul cultivators. As a result, the Yellow Maple Valley had enjoyed a resurgence and was now a major sect in the Heavenly South region. In contrast, the Drifting Cloud Sect had a massive foundation forged for it by Han Li, but its nascent soul elders had fallen one after another due to different circumstances. In the 1,000 years after that, no other nascent soul elder had emerged among its ranks, and it had now been reduced to a third-rate sect in the Dreamcloud Mountain range. Even the major sects of old, such as the Ancient Sword Sect and 100 Possibilities Pavilion, had mostly been replaced by newer sects. Han Li was struck by a sense of mixed emotions upon hearing about all of this, but there was nothing he could do aside from give a wry smile. Chapter 2449, Great North Essence Crystals. Half a year later, Han Li was standing near a set of secluded ruins in the Yue Nation of the Heavenly South region, appraising a dilapidated stone wall with a contemplative expression. The ruins had clearly been abandoned for a long time, and it was rife with unkempt weeds and shrubs, and the bricks were covered in thick layers of dark green moss. There was a small gray section left exposed on the stone wall ahead of Han Li, and a corner of a Han character could be seen engraved on the wall. After a while, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out behind Han Li, and a couple rounded the corner with their son. The couple appeared to be around 30 years of age, and the man had dark skin with large hands and feet, while the woman had an air of simplistic beauty about her. Both of them were carrying baskets that were filled with things such as incense, and they appeared to be an average couple. The two of them faltered slightly at the sight of Han Li, while their son, who appeared to be 7 or 8 years of age, was also appraising Han Li with curiosity in his bright and adorable eyes. The man hesitated momentarily before making his way toward Han Li with his wife and son. Greetings, may I ask your name? Han Li had his back facing the man, but judging from his attire, the man could tell that Han Li was a well-educated individual, and that evoked a sense of respect within the man, who had rarely ever left the village. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D62E. I'm a member of the Han family, and I've come to visit the old Han family ancestral hall, Han Li replied as he turned around, and there was a very slight resemblance between him and the man. A hint of elation appeared on the man's face upon hearing this. I see, you must be from another branch of our Han family. I heard from my great-grandfather that our Han family was once a very prosperous family over 1,000 years ago, and there were many people coming back from different places to pay their respects at the ancestral hall, but that's become a rarer occurrence of late. As time passes by, the members of those branches of the Han family will gradually forget their roots, so it's no surprise that there are fewer and fewer of them returning to visit the ancestral hall. I have to give you credit for staying here, Han Li said with a hint of approval in his voice. I heard from great-grandfather that his generation had thought about leaving, but they couldn't bear to leave this place behind. Apparently, an ancestor of our Han family became a deity. If we were to leave, that deity wouldn't be able to find us if he ever returned someday, so we decided to stay. The man chuckled in response. A deity, eh? Hee, I've heard of that as well, but that legend was passed down from thousands of years ago, so it may not have much credibility, Han Li said. I'm not sure about that, but that's what all my seniors told me. Also, during a past ceremony, my great-grandfather once brought out a scabbard of a divine sword that was said to have been left behind by that deity ancestor of ours, so I'm sure there's some truth in that tale, the man said with a smile. A sword scabbard. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. For some reason, the man felt Han Li's presence to be very comforting, and he said, "That's right. According to me seniors, the scabbard had always been worshipped in the ancestral hall, and many years ago, it saved our Han family from a major crisis. Unfortunately, after it was used that one time, the sword disintegrated into golden light, leaving only the scabbard behind. The scabbard doesn't appear to possess any special powers, but it's always been worshipped nonetheless. I heard that our Han family fell into rapid decline during a subsequent crisis as we no longer had the divine sword, and that forced its members to split up and leave. I see, I don't know about all of that, but a family will inevitably experience peaks and troughs. Is this your son? He looks like a very smart boy. What's his name?" Henley asked in a nonchalant manner as he cast his gaze toward the little boy. The man was very pleased to hear Han Li praising his son, and he nudged his son forward as he said, He, this is my third eldest son, Han Ming. Minger, come here and greet your senior." The boy was very young, but he wasn't shy at all and immediately knelt down before kowtowing to Han Li twice as a greeting. Han Li had identified that the boy possessed a spiritual root, and even though it was only an ordinary one, it still evoked a sense of hope within Han Li. "Good boy. Seeing as we've met here, we must have some type of affinity. Here is a gift for your son. If he's fortunate, then perhaps this will be a major opportunity for him. Even if it doesn't work out that way, this will ensure that he lives a very long life." Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over to summon a Jade badge, which he cast an incantation seal into before attaching a red string to it, then placed it around the boy's neck. The Jade badge began to glow with white light, then suddenly vanished in a flash along with the red string. The boy's parents were astonished to see this, and by the time they looked up, Han Li was already nowhere to be seen. The boy's father was immediately rooted to the spot, while his wife yelled, "Was that a ghost?" During the next few days, word of the ghost encounter experienced by Han Heisey and his family spread through the neighboring villages, providing a good topic for gossip. Only after several months had passed by did everyone forget about this incident. However, several months after that, Han Ming unintentionally discovered the secret within the Jade badge and suddenly left his home. Several years later, he was able to use the power of the badge to become a disciple to a nascent soul stage elder of the Drifting Cloud sect. From there, he went on to become a vastly renowned cultivator, and the Han family experienced another resurgence as a result. The outskirts of the Devilfall Valley was once a lively and bustling place, but as the supply of spirit medicines there dwindled, it had become a deserted place that no one was willing to venture into. However, on this day, an azure shadow ignored all of the residual restrictions within the valley and flew directly into it. Half a day later, an earth-shattering boom suddenly rang out within the Devilfall Valley, causing the nearby area to tremor violently. Immediately thereafter, a streak of azure light shot out before vanishing into the distance after just a few flashes. Such a massive commotion naturally alerted all of the nearby sects, and disciples were immediately sent to investigate. As a result, everyone was stunned to discover that a mountain that separated the inner and outer valley had disappeared, and there was only a gargantuan crater in its wake with wisps of silver light surging out of the ground. Great North Essence Light. Some of the more knowledgeable and experienced cultivators immediately identified this light, and many of them hurriedly entered the giant crater to try and collect some Great North Essence crystals. Unfortunately, even after scouring the crater hundreds of times, they could only find around a dozen of these crystals, and a significant conflict erupted between these cultivators as a result. The one who was responsible for all of this was naturally none other than Han Li. He had excavated the Great North Essence crystals under the Devilfall Valley, then arrived in a secluded cave nearby before setting up an extremely complex formation. There was no need for him to remain in the human world any longer, so he was preparing to return to the spirit realm. However, due to the fact that he had to return with the Great North Essence crystals, it was more difficult than when he had ascended, so he had no choice but to use a formation. Several hours later, the formation was finally complete. Hanli sat at the center of the formation and made a hand seal, upon which a giant five-colored disc flew out of his body. The entire formation immediately began to buzz incessantly, and bursts of spiritual light swept out of it to inundate Hanli's entire body. Moments later, a rumbling boom rang out within the cave, and a thick pillar of white light erupted out of the heavens, only disappearing after it had reached an altitude of over 100,000 feet. At the same time, Hanli suddenly reverted back into the blue-robed man, who slumped onto the formation and fell completely still again. Within a secret chamber in the Azure Origin Palace, Hanli suddenly opened his eyes, and a yellow storage bracelet appeared on the futon in front of him without any warning. A pleased look appeared on Hanli's face upon seeing this storage bracelet. With these Great North Essence crystals, he would finally be able to complete the integrated 5 extreme mountains. That, in addition to the true soul pill, would give him a very good chance to transcend his ascension tribulation. Of course, as a safety precaution, he had to master the 3rd stage of the spirit refinement technique, and also capitalize on his vast spirit Tao physique to master the organ refinement origin arts and other immortal cultivation arts. Once all that was done, he would be ready for his tribulation. With that in mind, a hint of irrepressible excitement welled up in Hanli's heart. Chapter 2450, Ascension Tribulation. 8,000 years was an unimaginably long period of time for a mortal, but for ancient true spirits who went into slumber for thousands of years at a time, it was nothing more than the blink of an eye. 8,000 years later, the human race had become a first-rate power on the Tian Yuan continent. On this day, countless mortals had gathered on the street of all of the human cities, discussing something among themselves with excited expressions. There were also armed guards patrolling the streets, as well as groups of cultivators patrolling the sky. All of the cities on the outskirts of human territory had activated all of their restrictions, and massive flying treasures loaded with armored warriors had risen up into the air. It was as if the entire human race were preparing for war. On the summit of a massive mountain tens of thousands of kilometers away from the city, 3 foreign Grand Ascension stage beings were seated across from one another. One of them was a burly man in a 5-colored beast-eyed garment who was gulping down mouthfuls of wine, and he was joined by a white-robed young man with a pale complexion, as well as a heavily wrinkled green-robed elderly man. After a long while, the burly man suddenly asked, "Heavenly Lord Bai, it's about time, isn't it? The best time to transcend an ascension tribulation would be at noon, when the yang energy is most abundant. This is the most powerful being in the spirit realm we're talking about here, so he's definitely aware of this. Just be patient and wait for a while longer," the green-robed elderly man replied as he opened his eyes. "That's true. At such close proximity, there's no way we won't be alerted once the tribulation begins. It's been countless years since someone attempted an ascension tribulation. I'm getting a little excited just thinking about it," the burly man said with a smile. "I can't recall when someone from the spirit realm last successfully transcended an ascension tribulation. I can only remember that it happened a very, very long time ago. I must say, this heavenly zenith hand of the human race is very courageous for making no attempt to keep his tribulation transcendence a secret. In the past, everyone who's attempted such tribulations have always done so in secret in fear of being found out," the white-robed young man said with a hint of admiration in his voice. "During these past years, many of our old acquaintances have disappeared. There must have been quite a few of them who had attempted tribulation transcendences in secret. Seeing as none of us detected those tribulation attempts, they must have all perished," the elderly man sighed. "All of us are repressing our magic power with all our might in fear of attracting a heavenly tribulation too early. Yet this heavenly zenith hand is making a tribulation attempt after no more than 10,000 years as a grand ascension stage being. I also greatly admire his courage. By the way, fellow Taoist Bai, I heard that you encountered Heavenly Lord Han several thousand years ago. What kind of person is he?" the burly man asked. "I haven't had a chance to ever meet fellow Taoist Han, so I'm also quite interested to hear your answer," the white-robed young man chimed in with an intrigued expression. "I did indeed meet fellow Taoist Han several thousand years ago, but I can't muster up the words to describe him," the elderly man replied with slightly furrowed brows after a brief hesitation. Then what were his powers like? Surely you were able to deduce that, the white-robed young man said. I can only say that he's extremely powerful. I didn't try to engage him in battle, but I'm sure that even 3 or 4 of me combined definitely wouldn't have been a match for him, the elderly man replied with a serious expression. What? Surely you jest, Heavenly Lord Bai. How could he possibly be able to defeat 3 or 4 of you at once? We've been acquaintances for a very long time, and we're extremely familiar with your powers, the white-robed young man exclaimed as he shook his head in disbelief. The burly man was also very skeptical to hear this. I wouldn't make jokes about something like this. If you two had gotten the chance to meet him, you would know why I'm making this assessment. Setting aside everything else, just a glance from him had struck me with a bone-chilling sensation. That's a clear indication that his spiritual sense is several times more powerful than my own, the elderly man replied with a wry smile. The white-robed young man and the burly man couldn't help but exchange a bewildered glance upon hearing this. In any case, this is good news. The more powerful fellow Taoist Han is, the greater the chance that he'll successfully transcend this tribulation. If that happens, energy fluctuations from the true immortal realm will emanate from the passageway that opens up the true immortal realm. All of the powerful beings in the entire realm should be able to sense this, and if we can attain enlightenment by immersing ourselves in those energy fluctuations, we'll be sure to benefit immensely. We're in very close proximity to fellow Taoist Han, so we should be able to sense those energy fluctuations more clearly, the burly man said as he returned to a calm expression. If that weren't the case, we wouldn't have gone to the trouble of coming all the way here, the white-robed young man chuckled in response. Thus, the 3 of them conversed for a while longer before falling silent again. Similar scenes were taking place in several other places outside the giant city. An astonishing number of Grand Ascension stage beings had gathered in the human territory, and many of them were old monsters who were constantly in seclusion and had to repress their magic power with all their might before they dared to come out. On the outskirts of a certain deserted island in the boundless sea, a man and a woman were standing next to one another. The woman was Fairy Ice Soul, and she was accompanied by a brocade-robed man with a remarkable disposition. There should be a very good chance that Brother Han succeeds in his tribulation transcendence. I'm sure we'll benefit immensely from witnessing such a spectacle at such close quarters, fellow Taoist Hu Jun, Fairy Ice Soul said. Indeed, if it weren't for the pills that had come out of the Azure Origin Palace, there's no way I would have been able to reach the Grand Ascension stage, and now I'm once again benefiting from Heavenly Zenith Han. The man by the name of Hu Jun replied with a hint of admiration in his voice. He was a new Grand Ascension stage, who had appeared in the human race during the past 1,000 years. As for Mo Giantly, he had perished during a major heavenly tribulation several hundred years ago. On the other side of the island were around a dozen cultivators standing in front of a giant black ark, among which was a trio of stunning beauties who were casting their eyes toward the center of the island with solemn expressions. These 3 were none other than Nangong Wan, Yuan Yao, and Silvermoon. Not long after Han Li's soul fragment returned from the human world, Yuan Yao and Yan Li had returned to the human race, where they moved into a side palace on the Origin Integration Island. As for Silvermoon, she had been freed from the curse of her art of indifference and reached the Grand Ascension stage over 1,000 years ago. Behind those 3 women were the Ice Phoenix and Han Li's direct disciples. During the past several thousand years, all of Han Li's disciples had reached the body integration stage. As for whether they would be able to reach the Grand Ascension stage, that was up to them. The Ice Phoenix, Nangong Wan, and Yuan Yao were all on the cusp of the Grand Ascension stage, and with her Ice Phoenix physique, the Ice Phoenix would presumably have a much better chance of reaching the Grand Ascension stage than the others. These were the people closest to Han Li, and they had immense confidence in him, but they still couldn't help but be concerned. High up in the sky close to 10,000 kilometers away, a black-robed young woman was standing on a black bird, looking in the direction of the deserted island with a complex expression. Beside her stood the Black Phoenix monarch, and she wore a sympathetic expression as she said, "Dare, if you really want to bid farewell to Senior Han, then why don't you go to see him? Don't make this a lasting regret that could affect your mental state. It's all right. Brother Han has always seen me as a little sister, and big sister Nangong and the others are already there, so there's no need for me to throw myself into the mix. I'll just watch his ascension from afar," Dare replied in a calm manner. The Black Phoenix monarch could only heave a faint sigh in response. Letter 1D4EF, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. They. At the center of a giant formation that had been set up at the center of the island, Han Li, Taoist Zai, Mo Guang, and Huo Yuzi were gathered together, looking up into the sky. A five-colored cloud that encompassed virtually the entire island down below was slowly taking shape in the sky, and even though it was expanding at a very slow rate, the increase in its mass was still noticeable. Looks like you'll have to transcend your ascension tribulation soon, fellow Taoist Han. With your powers, I'm sure you'll be able to transcend this tribulation with ease, Mo Guang said with a faint smile. You think far too highly of me, brother Mo Guang. Countless grand ascension stage beings have perished at this hurdle. I certainly can't treat this tribulation lightly, Han Li replied. That may apply to everyone else, but you've mastered the third stage of the spirit refinement technique and the organ refinement origin arts. Even the average immortal is most likely no match for you. If you were to encounter Ma Liang again in your current state, you'd be able to kill him with ease. I'm actually very intrigued. Your aptitude clearly isn't all that exceptional, but you've been able to cultivate these immortal abilities to a stunning extent. I must say I've never seen anyone like you, Huo Yuzi mused. Perhaps I'm naturally suited to cultivating these immortal techniques, Han Li replied with a smile. Taoist Zai suddenly interjected. Please don't forget the promise you made to me once you ascend to the true immortal realm, Master. You've recovered your memories and have accepted me as your master, so I'll be sure to follow through on my promise, Han Li replied with a serious expression. Chapter 2451, Ascension. Those were the wishes of my former master, and you'll only have a chance to fulfill them once you ascend, Taoist Zai replied with a nod. Right at this moment, the five-colored cloud in the sky had become extremely enormous, and it was giving off an indescribably heavy aura. Please stay back, fellow Taoists. I'm about to transcend my tribulation, Han Li said as he looked up into the sky through narrowed eyes. Mo Guang and the others naturally had no objection to this, and they immediately flew away from Han Li. At the same time, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release Jin Tong, who also flew away in a flash. After that, he sat down with a calm expression. Soon, Mo Guang and the others had appeared on the other side of the island, where they drew to a halt before turning back to face the center of the island from afar. All of a sudden, a burst of loud rumbling rang out, and a giant black hole appeared within the five-colored cloud, following which a gust of gray wind swept forth. Initially, the gust of wind was quite unremarkable, but as soon as it left the black hole, it descended from above as a sea of fierce wind. That's heavenly astral wind. It looks like the ascension tribulation is about to arrive, Huo Yuzi said with a faint smile. This heavenly astral wind is quite formidable, but fellow Taoist Han has already prepared countermeasures against it, so he has nothing to fear, Mo Guang replied in an unhurried manner. As soon as his voice trailed off, an azure lotus flower bloomed at the center of the island. Initially, it was only around the size of a house, but it soon swelled to several acres in size before releasing countless streaks of azure sword chi that sliced through the nearby space. Lethal heavenly astral winds descended from above, but the azure lotus flower remained completely resolute, shielding Han Li within it. The storm of heavenly astral wind lasted several hours, and if a normal grand ascension stage cultivator were in Han Li's place, this storm alone would have whittled away most of their magic power, making it impossible for them to transcend the rest of the tribulation. However, to Han Li, this was barely a warm-up. All of a sudden, the fierce winds gushing out of the black hole finally ceased, but it was immediately replaced by a scorching heat wave. Immediately thereafter, countless palm-sized crimson runes appeared around the edge of the black hole, and there were golden patterns flashing on each of the runes. A string of dull thumps rang out as these runes quickly exploded into balls of crimson light, then came crashing down from above as a storm of lava, staining the entire sky a crimson color in the process. The deserted island was extremely massive, and those on the outskirts of the island were situated very far away from Han Li, but they could still sense the scorching heat waves surging toward them from the distance, prompting them to release protective treasures to defend themselves. The Ink Spirit Holy Ark also shuddered before releasing a black light barrier to protect everyone on the Ark. A hint of concern flashed through the eyes of Nangongwan and the others upon seeing this. They were already struggling to withstand the heat waves from so far away, the conditions had to be over 100 times worse for Han Li. What was even more worrisome to them was that the heavenly tribulation had only just begun. All of a sudden, a giant silver bird flew out of the massive lotus flower. Initially, the bird was only several tens of feet in size, but it was able to completely disregard the storm of lava as all of its feathers took on a faint golden hue. At the same time, it swelled to over 10,000 feet in size while releasing a burst of glacial power, transforming the entire area within a radius of thousands of kilometers into a world of glacial ice. 3 days and 3 nights later, tribulations of all types of descriptions rained down from the heavens, but Han Li was able to nullify them with ease. At this point, the entire island had already been destroyed, and there was only a light formation that was supporting the azure lotus flowers from below. The nearby surface of the sea had also dropped by several tens of feet, and one half was completely frozen, while the other was a world of scorching lava. Aside from Ice Soul, Silver Moon, and several other Grand Ascension stage beings, everyone else had retreated further away. Once the black hole in the sky disappeared, balls of purple lightning began to appear within the 5-colored cloud, and the fearsome lightning tribulation finally arrived. However, Han Li was already prepared for this, and he raised a hand up into the air, upon which a small gray mountain appeared above the azure lotus flower before instantly swelling to over 100,000 feet tall. A series of gray halos then proliferated out of the mountain in all directions, and with each halo that the purplish golden lightning flashed through, the power of the lightning would be slightly diminished. These halos were imbued with some type of power of law that specifically repressed the power of heavenly lightning. Some of the bolts of purplish golden lightning didn't even make it to Han Li before the halos wiped them out of existence. However, the remaining bolts of lightning were able to pass directly through the giant gray mountain, as if it were nothing more than an illusion. A burst of piercing blue light flashed within Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he immediately rose to his feet. An almighty devilish projection with 3 heads and 6 arms then appeared within the azure lotus flower before making a grabbing motion to summon a massive dark green sword. However, the projection paid no heed to the sword as a dense golden light barrier above it, and it clenched its 6 hands into tight fists before lashing out toward the heavens. A string of earth-shattering explosions rang out as a giant golden vortex appeared above the devilish projection before releasing a burst of fearsome power. The oncoming bolts of purplish golden lightning were impacted by this power, and most of it was drawn into the vortex in a flash. The little lightning that remained struck the golden light barrier above the devilish projection, causing it to tremor violently, but were unable to break through. This was the immortal secret technique, Origin Astral Barrier, that Han Li had cultivated. The purplish golden lightning fell continuously for over an hour before subsiding, but a series of purplish golden dragon projections then appeared in the sky. They opened their mouths in unison, and house-sized balls of lightning came crashing down from the heavens. A resounding boom rang out as the light barrier above the devilish projection finally disintegrated along with the dozen or so purplish golden lightning dragons. The 5-colored cloud up above then parted while the thunderclaps subsided, and a giant expressionless face that had appeared in the sky also began to blur. A burst of piercing purple light flashed behind the giant face, and a long white rift was slowly opened up. This is the gate to the true immortal realm. At this point, Han Li had already expended most of his magic power, but he was ecstatic as he reverted back to his human form. He looked up at the white rift with irrepressible excitement in his eyes, and right at this moment, the giant face that had almost completely faded suddenly opened its mouth again. A loud thunderclap rang out, and a bolt of rainbow lightning came crashing down from above, piercing through the giant lotus flower and reaching Han Li in a flash. Han Li was given a massive fright by this, and he hurriedly rubbed his hands together before raising them to release a burst of golden lightning. Immediately thereafter, he slashed his dark green wooden sword through the air to unleash a green sword projection. A thunderous boom rang out across the entire sky, and a burst of scintillating light that lit up virtually the entire sea appeared above Han Li before quickly being destroyed by bursts of law fluctuations. Han Li stumbled out into the open, and his face had turned extremely pale. His entire body was charred black, and the wooden sword in his hand had snapped in half. Han Li glanced down at what remained of his wooden sword, then looked up at the giant face in the sky, and upon discovering that it had actually disappeared on this occasion, he finally heaved a long sigh of relief. A black light formation appeared beside him amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, and Mo Guang, Huo Zuzi, Daoist Zai, and Jin Tong appeared at once. He, congratulations on transcending your tribulation, Brother Han. You'll be able to ascend to the true immortal realm soon. Indeed, I've finally transcended my ascension tribulation, and am about to become an immortal, Han Li murmured in a trance-like state. A faint smile appeared on Mo Guang's face, and he was just about to say something further when dazzling light erupted out of the white rift in the sky, following which a white pillar of light descended to instantly envelop Han Li and the others. The pillar of light began to revolve, and countless golden runes surged forth in a frenzy. At the same time, a burst of suffocating law fluctuations from the true immortal realm proliferated outward in all directions, instantly sweeping through every corner of the entire spirit realm. All of the Grand Ascension stage beings were ecstatic to sense these fluctuations, and they immediately closed their eyes to immerse themselves within it. Mo Guang and Huo Zuzi also exchanged an ecstatic glance upon seeing this, and the former vanished into Han Li's body as a burst of black qi, while the latter flew up Han Li's sleeve as a crimson fireball. Daoist Zai and Jin Tong were an immortal puppet and a spirit beast of Han Li's respectively, so they naturally didn't have to fear this pillar of light, and they also disappeared into a spirit beast bracelet on Han Li's wrist. At this moment, around a dozen streaks of light appeared in the distant sky before approaching Han Li as quickly as they could, but it was already too late. Han Li only caught a brief glimpse of Nangong Wan's urgent expression within one of the streaks of light before his body became completely weightless, and countless golden runes surrounded him, carrying him up toward the white rift along the pillar of light. In the instant that he entered the rift, Han Li's entire body stiffened, and he immediately fell unconscious. After an indeterminate period of time, Han Li opened his eye as a cool sensation flowed through his entire body, and he was greeted by an unfamiliar handsome young man, who smiled to reveal a set of pristine white teeth as he said, "I am Gao Sheng, and I welcome you to the northern glacial immortal region." Bonus Chapter 1. In the westernmost region of the continent, a sturdy-looking stone door suddenly exploded from the outside amid a resounding boom. Countless stone shards flew in all directions, while an azure-robed young man strode into the room in an unhurried manner. The young man had a dark complexion and a very ordinary appearance, but his eyes were remarkably clear, and there were hints of blue light flashing deep within his pupils. So this is the sacred hall of the Thousand Bamboo Sect that disappeared several thousand years ago. It doesn't appear to be all that remarkable, but the restrictions outside were quite powerful. Even though they had lost most of their efficacy, it still took me close to a day to break through them. The young man murmured to himself with slightly furrowed brows after drawing to a halt and inspecting his surroundings. Beyond the stone door was a secret chamber that was over 300 feet in size. Aside from a gray and antiquated stone coffin at the center of the room, and around a dozen broken puppets littered around the chamber, there was nothing else to be seen. A thick layer of dust had accumulated on the ground, indicating that no one had entered this place for countless years. The young man paused momentarily at the entrance before his gaze fell upon the stone coffin at the very center of the room. As for those puppets, with his mastery in the art of puppetry, he could tell just from a single glance that they were beyond repair, so he didn't pay them any heed. Apparently, this is the final residence of the monarch of soul divergence. Seeing as this coffin is here, it seems that this information may well be accurate, the young man murmured to himself. Immediately thereafter, he vanished on the spot before reappearing near the stone coffin in the next instant. He then swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a gust of fierce azure wind that swept away all of the dust on the coffin, revealing the complex spirit patterns inscribed onto its lid. The young man inspected these spirit patterns for a while, and after briefly pondering the situation, he immediately took a half step back before making a series of hand seals. All of a sudden, runes of all types of different colors began to fly out of his fingertips, then transformed into specks of spirit flames that quickly vanished into the stone coffin. A faint buzzing sound rang out as the spirit patterns on the surface of the coffin began to glow brightly. All of a sudden, layers of nets formed by translucent threads emerged out of thin air, forcibly pushing the spirit flames back out of the coffin. The young man raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, then suddenly slammed a palm down in the direction of the coffin from afar. At the same time, a faint smile appeared on his face as he murmured to himself, These nets may work on someone else, but they're nowhere near powerful enough to stop me." As soon as his voice trailed off, a huge azure palm that was around 10 feet in size appeared above the stone coffin amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, then crashed down heavily from above. Boom! Another resounding boom rang out as the nets of translucent threads released by the stone coffin's spirit patterns were shattered by the giant palm. Even the coffin down below was shattered as a result of the tremendously powerful strike. Thus, everything in the coffin was immediately revealed. The young man focused his gaze on the coffin's contents, upon which a surprised look appeared on his face. There was nothing inside the coffin aside from an azure humanoid puppet that was several feet in length. The young man's eyes narrowed slightly as he made a grabbing motion with one hand, and the azure puppet shuddered before rising up into the air and landing in his grasp. The young man held the puppet in one hand, while quickly conducting a thorough examination with his other hand. After a long while, he tossed the azure puppet aside as a disappointed look appeared on his face. "The puppet looks good, but it's completely useless to me. It seems that this isn't actually the final resting place of the monarch of soul divergence. Looks like I made the trip here for nothing." Thus, the young man turned around and was just about to exit the secret chamber when something caught his attention out of the corner of his gaze. This was a dilapidated puppet, yet something about it sparked the young man's interest, and he faltered in his footsteps before making his way toward the puppet. The monarch of soul divergence had reigned supreme in the westernmost region for over 100 years, and puppetry was one of the arts that he excelled the most at. None of the puppets could be used here, but in contrast with that puppet in the coffin, which had been placed there just for show, these broken puppets were clearly all creations of a very high caliber. If he could take them back and carefully study them, perhaps his expertise in the art of puppetry would be advanced to a higher level. With that in mind, he swept his sleeve through the air several times in succession to stow all of the puppets away into his storage bracelet. However, right as he made his way over to a giant ape puppet, a startling turn of events suddenly unfolded. The puppet had remained completely still up to this point, but it suddenly opened its mouth to release a burst of rainbow light that shot forth directly toward the young man's face. The young man was naturally rather startled by this, but he remained calm as he threw his head back while sweeping a hand through the air ahead of himself to summon a small black shield. A dull thump rang out, and the burst of rainbow light passed directly through the black shield, as if it had no physical form before vanishing into the young man's glabella in a flash. The young man stumbled back several meters before finding his balance again, but the calm expression he previously wore had been replaced by one of rage and alarm. Right at this moment, a sharp voice rang out inside the young man's mind. "He, you've been struck by my seven passions art. Surrender yourself to me right now or I'll show what it's like to wish you were dead." The seven passions art. The young man's heart immediately sank upon hearing this, but he certainly wasn't just going to give up without any resistance. He immediately swept his sleeves through the air, releasing 72 azure flying swords that circled through the air before forming an azure sword formation around him. The young man then sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes as he began to circulate his magic power throughout his own body. "HMPH, so you still refuse to give up. Fine, let me show you the power of the seven passions art." The young man's eyelids twitched slightly upon hearing this, but he remained completely unmoved as he continued to sit still on the spot. At the same time, a burst of chanting suddenly rang out within the secret chamber. The young man shuddered slightly upon hearing this, but he was still able to maintain his seated posture. A cold harumph rang out, following which the chanting became several times faster and more urgent than before, but the young man remained seemingly completely unaffected as a peculiar look appeared on his face. "I see, so your seven passions art is only effective on beings at the nascent soul stage or above. In that case, you've met your match, fellow Taoist." The young man suddenly burst into laughter before swiping a finger through the air. A sharp streak of azure light was released, slicing the giant ape puppet cleanly in half down the middle to reveal a miniature golden figure that was around a foot tall. The miniature figure's eyes were translucent, and there were countless spirit patterns inscribed all over its body. It was also a rare humanoid puppet. Even though the miniature figure was only a puppet, a stunned look appeared on its face, and it was just about to say something, but the young man within the azure sword formation had already vanished on the spot before appearing right in front of the puppet in a wraith-like manner. He then raised a hand to release a burst of invisible power that completely immobilized the miniature golden figure on the spot. Are you the monarch of soul divergence that ruled supreme over the westernmost region 10,000 years ago? The young man asked as he stared intently at the golden figure. So what if I am? So what if I'm not? The miniature golden figure replied after a brief silence, and on this occasion he had adopted the voice of an elderly man. If you're not, then I'm going to have to put an end to your life for attacking. However, if you are, then you'll receive a far more hospitable welcome from me. After all, I came all the way here with the sole purpose of tracking you down, senior. The young man replied as a hint of a smile appeared on his face. You came to find me. Who are you? The miniature golden figure was quite taken aback to hear this. So you really are the monarch of soul divergence. It's incredible that you've managed to live for this long, senior. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Han Li, and I cultivated your great development arts by chance. On this occasion, I came all the way from the heavenly south region to come and find you. The young man replied with a genuine smile as he released the restrictions binding the miniature humanoid puppet. Han Li, you cultivated my great development arts. The golden figure was even more surprised now. Bonus Chapter 2. That's right. I've already mastered the first few layers of the great development arts. All I'm missing are the mantras for the final 3 layers that you've never disclosed to anyone, senior. Han Li replied in an honest manner. You mastered the first 4 layers. I don't believe you. Show me. The golden figure demanded after contemplating the situation for a brief moment. Sure, I'll show you some of the techniques of the 4th layer of the great development art as proof. Han Li replied with a smile. All right, then go ahead, the miniature golden figure challenged. Thus, Han Li made a hand seal, and one of his fingertips turned a golden color as he thrust it through the air while uttering the words, Spirit-stunned thorn. His voice wasn't very loud, but the golden figure's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. A layer of faint silver light instantly erupted out of its body, and the light barrier shuddered slightly before returning to normal. I didn't think that you would have mastered the Spirit-stunned thorn already. Judging from the power of that technique, I can tell that you really have mastered the first 4 layers of the great development arts. However, my 7 passions art was specifically created to target nascent soul cultivators. Even late nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to remain impervious to it, so why were you completely unaffected? The golden figure asked. That's very simple. It's because my nascent soul was never struck by the 7 passions art. Instead, something else took the attack in its place. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he laid a hand onto the top of his own head, following which a black nascent soul that was completely identical to Han Li in appearance emerged. However, this nascent soul was looking very frail and lacking in energy and vigor. That's a second nascent soul, but how is that possible? I can see that you've only recently progressed to the nascent soul stage. How did you have the spare time and power to refine a second nascent soul? The golden figure was stunned to see this. Well spotted, senior. This is indeed a second nascent soul. I only recently refined it, and I was only able to do so as I had encountered some special opportunities. Now then, I've already shown you proof of my master of the great development arts. Would you be able to pass on the mantras for the final few layers to me now? Han Li asked. It took me an extensive amount of time and painstaking effort to create the great development arts. You don't look like one of my descendants or juniors, so why should I give you the mantras? The golden figure countered as a cold look appeared on its face. I don't think you have a choice in the matter in your current state, senior, Han Li said as he appraised the golden figure with a hint of a smile on his face. If you want to destroy what little remains of my soul, then go ahead. I've already lived for far too long, and the embrace of death no longer scares me. Even if you don't do anything to me, my soul is too feeble and will dissipate in a few years anyway. The monarch of soul divergence replied in a cold voice. You insist on opposing me, senior. Are you clinging on to the false hope that I won't know any soul search techniques? A cold look also appeared on Han Li's face. You think I would be afraid of a soul search technique? I was able to create a spiritual secret technique of the caliber of the great development arts. A mere soul search technique is child's play for me to ward off. If worse comes to worst, I'll just detonate my own soul on the spot. The monarch of soul divergence chuckled, seemingly completely unfazed. Han Li was at a slight loss for what to do upon hearing this. Only the soul of the monarch of soul divergence remained, and it barely had any magic power. However, the monarch of soul divergence was extremely adept in spiritual secret techniques, so there most likely really was no way for him to get what he wanted by force. With that in mind, Han Li reverted back to a more gentle approach. Why do you insist on being so stubborn, Senior? I've always been of the opinion that there's nothing in this world that can't be put up for exchange as long as the price is right. Exchange? I don't see anything you have that can be of interest to me, the golden figure countered as it crossed its arms in a skeptical manner. Would you be interested in this, Senior? Han Li paused momentarily before flipping a hand over, and a burst of black light flashed over his palm, following which a strange piece of wood that was around a foot in length appeared. The surface of the piece of wood was riddled with pits and bumps, and it was of a charred black color. It certainly wasn't the most elegant piece of wood. However, an ecstatic look immediately appeared on the monarch of Soul Divergence's face upon seeing the piece of wood. That's soul-nurturing wood. I didn't think you would have something like this. Soul-nurturing wood would be able to not only prevent the seepage of our spiritual power, it can slowly nurture your soul. I'm sure this is something that would be of use to you right now, Senior, Han Li said in a confident manner as he held the piece of wood in his hand. The golden figure hesitated for a long while before shaking its head in the end. This wood can indeed delay the day of my death, but too much of my soul has already dissipated. Even with this wood to nurture me, I'll only be able to live for a few more decades at most, so this thing alone is not going to be enough for me to tell you the mantras for the final few layers of the great development arts. This reply clearly came as a surprise to Han Li, and his brows furrowed slightly in response. After a brief silence, he said, "In that case, what would you like in exchange for the mantras? I can see that you still haven't completely resigned yourself to death yet. If you have any conditions, feel free to raise them, and if I can fulfill them, I definitely won't turn you down. Looks like you've already learned the secret of the great development arts and have found out that it can help you break through cultivation bottlenecks. In that case, I wouldn't be entirely opposed to bestowing the mantras upon you. However, I need you to refine a soul-nurturing treasure with that piece of soul-nurturing wood, and I also need you to do two other things for me," the monarch of Soul Divergence said with a faint smile. "Go ahead, Senior," Han Li prompted. "Looks like you know quite a bit about me. I'm sure you must be aware that aside from spiritual secret techniques, I'm also very adept in the art of puppetry. In fact, at one point, I became so engrossed in the art of puppetry that I neglected my cultivation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up like this," the monarch of Soul Divergence said in a slow voice. Han Li didn't really understand where this was going, but he remained patient. It was clear that the main point was still yet to come. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D4 2B, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D6 0 4, letter 1D6 AT, letter 1D5 5 4, letter 1D5 6 0, letter 1D4 6. During these years spent in this cave, I had an enormous amount of free time, and I made quite a few breakthroughs in my puppetry skills. On top of that, I've combined all of these breakthroughs to create a design for an ultimate puppet that should be no less powerful than a nascent soul cultivator. Unfortunately, I've been unable to refine it due to a lack of materials, and this is one of the few things that I regret. I want you to collect those materials and refine my puppet in order to fulfill this wish of mine and lay it to rest," the monarch of Soul Divergence said in a serious manner. Han Li's heart jolted slightly upon hearing this, but he maintained a calm facade. A puppet no less powerful than a nascent soul cultivator. The materials required to refine it must cost a fortune. Indeed it does. HMPH, but if you manage to refine the puppet, it'll belong to you in the end, so you'll be spending the money on yourself anyway, the monarch of Soul Divergence harumphed in response. After briefly weighing up his options, Qin Yi accepted the condition. "In that case, I can agree to that condition. Please state your other condition, Senior." "My second condition is far simpler to fulfill. I may have been trapped here for many years, but I'm aware that my 1,000 Bamboo sect is most likely just a shadow of its former self now. I don't even know if it's still under the control of my past disciples. I'm unable to pass all of my techniques and abilities onto them, but I don't want my inheritance to end here. Hence, I want you to find someone with exceptional aptitude for me to pass my cultivation arts onto and become my heir," the monarch of Soul Divergence said. Han Li was ecstatic to hear this. "Haha, that's not an issue at all. I'll accept both of your conditions. In that case, we have ourselves a deal. After you refine the soul-nurturing treasure, I'll pass the mantra for the first layer onto you, and after that we'll leave this place together," the monarch of Soul Divergence said. Han Li naturally had no objections to this. Several days later, Han Li emerged from the secret chamber and strode into the distance with a yellow bamboo tube that was around a foot in length carried on his back. A gentle breeze blew past, carrying with it the sound of a faint conversation. Never did I think that I would see the light of day again. I would advise you to keep your voice down, senior. This used to be the restricted area of the Thousand Bamboo Sect, and it could mean trouble if your descendants or juniors were to hear you. HMPH, with your cultivation base, those little rascals wouldn't be able to do anything to you. Besides, they're mine. The sound of the conversation became more and more distant before finally fading with the wind. Bonus Immortal Realm Chapter 1. The Northern Glacial Immortal Region. Han Li took a moment to inspect his surroundings, and only then did he discover that he was lying in a small square pond with side lengths of several feet. The water in the pond was warm and of a milky white color, and it was injecting a pleasant warmth into his body. The Northern Glacial Immortal Region is one of the 4 northern immortal regions of the true immortal realm. I'm sure you'll quickly familiarize yourself with this region. May I ask your name, fellow Taoist? This immortal ascension platform is in a very secluded area, and very rarely will fellow Taoists from the lower realms ascend to this place, the young man asked with a smile. I am Han Li, and I ascended from the spirit realm, so this is an immortal ascension platform. There doesn't seem to be anyone else here aside from you. Han Li pressed his palms gently onto the bottom of the pond, and he immediately flew out of the water. A flash of azure light then swept over his body, and he was completely dry again. At this point, he had already ensured that the important treasures in his body, such as the integrated 5 extreme mountains and the heaven-controlling vial, were safe and sound. However, Mo Guang and everything in his spirit beast pouch had become completely unresponsive. This place was a very simple platform, and the pond was situated at the center of the platform, which was enshrouded under a blue light barrier. Outside the light barrier, snow was falling thick and fast. This was a translucent world of snow and ice. Gao Sheng's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but they smoothed out again almost immediately thereafter. I see, so it's fellow Taoist Han. It's a bit troublesome that you've come from the spirit realm. Unfortunately, there are many lower realms that have been named spirit realm by their inhabitants. In any case, I'll just register you under a random spirit realm. The higher-ups generally won't check these records anyway. Thus, he made a grabbing motion with both hands, and a translucent jade book and a huge silver brush appeared in his grasp before he began to quickly write something down onto the book. Han Li was a little bewildered by his current situation, but his expression remained unchanged as he waited patiently on the spot. Moments later, both the jade book and the silver brush vanished in unison amid a flash of light from Gao Sheng's hands, and they were replaced by a thin purplish-golden jade badge, which he handed over to Han Li with a smile. Instead of immediately accepting the badge, Han Li asked, "May I ask what this is?" "This is your immortal badge, something that every ascended immortal receives following registration. With this badge, you'll be able to enter any of the major immortal cities without being examined. On top of that, this badge will grant you free access to some special places. This is a benefit only ascended immortals like you can enjoy. Local immortals like us don't have access to these things," Gao Sheng explained with a hint of envy in his voice. "Oh, why is that?" Han Li asked with a surprised expression. The true immortal realm is virtually boundless, and there are trillions upon trillions of local immortals. However, there are extremely few immortals who have ascended through their own power. Despite this, the number of high-grade immortals in each immortal region is almost evenly divided among ascended immortals and local immortals. I'm sure you understand what this entails, right, fellow Taoist? Gao Sheng replied with a smile. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D5 FF, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D6 AT, letter 1D6 A0, letter 1D4 1E. Letter 1D554, letter 1D560, letter 1D696. I see, I understand now. In that case, I'd be more than happy to accept this badge. Han Li nodded in response with an enlightened expression before raising a hand to accept the purplish-golden jade badge. He looked down at the badge to find that there was an extremely lifelike full-body portrait that was identical to him etched onto its surface, and the word Ascended was inscribed next to his name in golden seal text. Han stowed the jade badge up his sleeve, then smiled as he asked, "You seem very familiar with the true immortal realm, Brother Gao. May I ask who the higher-ups you were referring to are?" "There's no need for you to ask me that, Brother Han. You'll have a rough understanding of the true immortal realm once you examine everything recorded in this memory crystal," Gao Sheng replied as he raised a hand to toss a blue crystal over to Han Li. "You have my thanks, Brother Gao." Han Li caught the crystal with a grateful expression, then pressed it against his forehead, quickly learning the way to use the crystal. Soon, his spiritual sense had entered the crystal. Only after around 15 minutes had passed did Han Li remove the crystal from his forehead, and he said, "I see, so the true immortal realm has been split up into countless immortal regions, all of which are being overseen by the immortal palaces. That's quite interesting. Are they only responsible for supervision? Do they not rule over the immortal regions?" A peculiar look appeared on Gao Sheng's face upon hearing this, and he said, "You're a fast learner, fellow Taoist. Would you be interested to hear about the current state of the true immortal realm?" "Please enlighten me, Brother Gao." Han Li cupped a fist as he adopted a serious expression. "There's no need to be so polite, fellow Taoist Han. The situation in the true immortal realm is rather different from that of the lower realms. Technically, the immortal regions are supposed to submit to the rule of the immortal palaces, but in reality, each immortal region has many powers that aren't under the immortal palace. In fact, there are some formidable powers that are even more powerful than their immortal region's immortal palace. However, a certain level of order needs to be maintained in the true immortal realm to avoid catastrophes. So on an official basis, each immortal region is under the jurisdiction of its immortal palace. Of course, these immortal palaces themselves are also forces to be reckoned with. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in their positions. Those in charge of the immortal palaces are generally quite intelligent and refrain from provoking powers that are just as or even more formidable than the immortal palaces, so the true immortal realm is currently relatively peaceful. As long as you don't break the laws of the realm, you'll be able to live a free and leisurely life. As an ascended immortal, your situation will be slightly different from that of local immortals. You've transcended the lightning tribulation during your ascension, and the energy with your body has already begun to change, allowing you to accept immortal spiritual power. But the conversion process will most likely require several centuries to complete. If I were you, I would definitely choose to join a first-rate power in this immortal region and only consider other matters after your energy has been fully converted. Otherwise, for someone like you who has only just arrived in the true immortal realm, just the immortal spirit crystals you'll have to expend daily will cost a considerable sum, Gao Sheng explained. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face as he listened to Gao Sheng's explanation. "Thank you for your guidance, Brother Gao. Judging from your tone, I presume you're not from the immortal palace," Han Li said with a smile. "You've seen right through me, fellow Taoist Han. I am indeed not from the immortal palace. Instead, I'm from the Stone Hall, and I'm only here as I'm fulfilling some duties that the Stone Hall has assigned me. If you're willing to join our Stone Hall, then you would be welcomed with open arms. Not only will our Stone Hall be able to offer you all of the benefits that other powers can provide, I can make the decision to allow you to choose any high-grade immortal cultivation art to your liking from our Stone Hall's Heaven Scaling Pavilion," Gao Sheng said with a smile, making no effort to hide his intentions. Bonus Immortal Realm Chapter 2. Immortal Cultivation Arts, Han Li repeated as his eyes narrowed slightly. As the name suggests, immortal cultivation arts are cultivation arts for true immortals. Only by using cultivation arts of this caliber can one refine immortal spiritual power, allowing low-grade immortals to progress toward becoming high-grade immortals. However, the majority of low and mid-grade immortal cultivation arts will only yield 1 or 2 ranks of progression in one's cultivation upon full mastery, by which time a new cultivation art will have to be selected to continuing progressing. Only the high-grade immortal cultivation arts of the major powers can allow a true immortal to cultivate to an extremely high level. Only very rarely will you see cultivation arts of that caliber circulating in the outside world, and even if there are some going around, they'll only be low-quality ones, Gao Sheng explained. "Oh, is there no cultivation art that goes directly up to the Tao Patriarch level?" Han Li asked. A peculiar look appeared on Gao Sheng's face upon hearing this, but he then burst into laughter before offering an explanation. "Tao Patriarch, haha, you certainly dare to dream, fellow Taoist Han. Unfortunately, even the legendary 10 divine tomes of the true immortal realm wouldn't allow you to cultivate directly to the Tao Patriarch level. Currently, there are several hundred known Tao Patriarchs in the true immortal realm, and every single one of them had to endure countless tribulations and hardships, while also encountering incredibly miraculous opportunities to reach their cultivation base. Even the most powerful immortal cultivation arts can only allow one to cultivate to the high zenith stage, which is right below the Tao Patriarch stage. From that point onward, you'll only be able to rely on yourself." And Li wasn't surprised to hear this, and he nodded in response before asking, "It seems like becoming a Tao patriarch is virtually impossible. May I ask how many immortal cultivation ranks there are below the high zenith stage?" Letter 1D4 BB, letter 1D4 5F, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D4 64, letter 1D4 52, letter 1D4 4F, letter 1D4 B8, letter 1D4 5C, letter 1D6 2E. Even though all of us are collectively referred to as true immortals by beings from lower realms, in reality, the true immortal stage is only the lowest immortal cultivation rank. There are several ranks above the true immortal stage, such as the void spirit stage and the clear origin stage, and it's often the case that millions of years of arduous cultivation will be required to progress up each major cultivation rank. As such, immortals are split up into the advanced, intermediate, and elementary tiers. Even among those at the same cultivation ranks, a difference in tiers would equate to an enormous disparity in power, Gao Sheng replied. "May I ask what cultivation base you're currently at, Brother Gao?" Han Li asked. "I'm very embarrassed to say that even though I've been a true immortal for several million years, I've been unable to progress any further than the advanced true immortal stage. If I don't encounter any other opportunities, then this is most likely where I'll remain for the rest of my life," Gao Sheng replied with a wry smile. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. He was completely unable to glean Gao Sheng's cultivation base, yet the latter was only an advanced true immortal. "In that case, newly ascended immortals like myself must only be at the elementary true immortal stage," Han Li mused. "I guess you could say that, although it's not entirely true. After all, you're still yet to convert all of your energy into immortal spiritual power, so it'll still take you several centuries to reach the elementary true immortal stage," Gao Sheng replied with a smile. Han Li was speechless upon hearing this, and only after a long while did he speak again. "Judging from what you just said, there must be no lack of ordinary cultivators outside of true immortals like us in the true immortal realm, right? There are indeed cultivators below the true immortal stage in the true immortal realm. Despite our powers, even immortals like us can't ensure that our descendants will also be able to cultivate to become immortals themselves. Due to their inability to harness immortal spiritual power, the lifespans of these people are limited, so they can only marry and reproduce to give birth to more mortals. With this cycle constantly repeating itself, a considerable population of cultivators and mortals below the true immortal stage has naturally built up over time." Gao Sheng seemed to be quite dismissive of these mortals. "I see. In that case, a high-grade immortal cultivation art is indeed extremely important for us true immortals." Han Li nodded in response as he began to weigh up his options. Gao Sheng could tell that Han Li was still a little hesitant, so he urged, "Our stone hall holds ascended immortals in very high regard, so you won't find any other powers that offer more favorable benefits than us. On top of that, you can adopt the position of guest elder in our stone hall. If you feel like our stone hall doesn't suit you in several centuries, you can just give back all of the benefits that you received from our stone hall and leave with no questions asked." Han Li was finally convinced. "That's a very alluring set of conditions. In that case, I'll come with you to take a look at your stone hall." Just as Gao Sheng had said, the most important thing for him now was to convert the energy in his body into true immortal power, so he could truly progress to the true immortal stage. As such, joining a major power before gradually learning about the true immortal realm was a very good option. Gao Sheng was naturally ecstatic to hear Han Li's response, and after assuring Han Li that he won't regret his decision, he swept a sleeve through the air, and a shadow emerged from his back before transforming into another silver-robed Gao Sheng. "Stand on duty in my stead here for now while I take fellow Taoist Han to the stone hall. You'll have to be quick. If the inspectors of the area notice your absence, I won't be able to cover for you for very long," the second Gao Sheng replied in an expressionless manner. "You don't need to worry about that. This immortal ascension platform is extremely secluded. Why would an inspector come here? If I recall correctly, the last time an inspector appeared here was several centuries ago. Besides, I'm only taking fellow Taoist Han to our stone hall, so at the very most, it'll only take around half a month before I'm back," Gao Sheng said in a nonchalant manner. "All right, as long as you know what you're doing. Just make sure you don't make me take the fall for you." With that, the second Gao Sheng strode over to the side of the pond and sat down with his legs crossed, then closed his eyes and began to meditate. A hint of surprise had naturally appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. Sorry you had to see that, Brother Han. That's an earthen clone that I refined, and it's not as powerful as I am, but it's more than powerful enough to deal with an elementary true immortal. With this clone here taking my place, I'll be able to leave with no worries. Let's go. I'll take you to the stone hall right now, Gao Sheng explained with a smile while making a hand seal, then pointed a finger at the light barrier encompassing the platform. A circular hole that was large enough for a person to fit through immediately appeared on the light barrier at his behest. Gao Sheng led the way out of the hole, and Han Li followed along immediately thereafter. In the instant that they left the platform, the full might of the snowstorm bore down upon them, carrying with it a burst of tremendous glacial power. Even with Han Li's extraordinary physical constitution, his brows furrowed slightly in the face of these harsh conditions. A hint of surprise flashed through Gao Sheng's eyes upon seeing this. The northern glacial immortal region was named as such for a reason. The average temperature in this immortal region was extremely low, and during such a fierce snowstorm, the glacial power in the air was not to be ignored. Even local elementary true immortals would generally have to carry one or two specially refined treasures to ward off the cold before they dared to directly face a snowstorm like this. Yet Han Li had only just ascended to the true immortal realm, but the snowstorm barely seemed to be bothering him at all, and that was very surprising to Gao Sheng. Gao Sheng's thoughts were quickly racing, but his hands didn't falter in the slightest as he released a white incantation seal downward. Immediately thereafter, several clear cries rang out from the thick snow that had accumulated on the ground below. Amid the flurry of snow that erupted up into the air, two pristine white gigantic peacocks emerged. Please go ahead, fellow Taoist. Gao Sheng got onto one of the peacocks before pointing at the other peacock and gesturing to Han Li with an inviting smile. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he flew onto the other peacock, and following an instruction from Gao Sheng, the two immortal beasts spread their wings and took flight, flying directly into the snow and ice. Thus, Han Li took his first step in his journey through the true immortal realm.